I think you guys might be missing my point. And my
Please,
point is
please make
this.
it in your own words, Eddie.
Okay.
We are curious.
Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Friday, June 13th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. So, gentlemen, let's start with Israel. They executed this attack on Iran and apparently it's ongoing. It involves drones, more than 200 jet fighters. They eliminated some key Iranian leaders. Importantly, the Israelis say the attacks will last for days, maybe even weeks. So, Tom, not entirely clear how much coordination or help came from the U.S., but this is the attack that was telegraphed yesterday. It comes in advance of what was supposed to be a sixth round of talks over Iran's nuclear program that was supposed to start this weekend. What do you make of the attack, and what do you make of the U.S. role in it?
Well, a couple things jumped out at me. Number one, we talked about this yesterday. This was not really a surprise. We had reports yesterday that an attack was imminent. We had the president of the United States saying that we were moving U.S. personnel out of the region. So this was something that, was clearly going to happen. But it was much bigger than I think anyone expected. The sophistication, the level of coordination, the intelligence that was used. This was a long time in the planning phase. And so those two things, it being as comprehensive as it was, and the fact that this is something that the Israelis have talked about for a long, long time, but haven't really executed until now. We got to see just how long they've been planning this, how seriously they've been taking it. And we'll see where it goes from here. But obviously, it's a huge escalation in the region. And the reports were that Donald Trump had urged Netanyahu not to do this, to give the peace talks more time. As we mentioned, Steve Witkoff was supposed to be headed over there for another round of talks. Obviously, the Israelis felt like this was the moment they had to do it. And President Trump has come out and said, we support their decision, and we will be, I think, standing by their side as they do this. But it's a big escalation, and theoretically, there will be retaliation from Iran, and we'll see, what shape and form that takes.
Yeah, Carl, what do you make of the timing of this? Because it does seem like it was Trump was trying, at least publicly, to slow this down in hopes that the negotiations would resume. But it looks like Netanyahu wasn't willing to wait.
Well, my guess is the Israelis didn't think these peace talks, the Iranians were just stalling, this is, Marco Rubio came out with sort of a Pontius Pilate-like statement, that they acted unilaterally. President Trump, you don't want to be too critical because we're not there in the meetings, but President Trump said he would end the war in Ukraine, before he took office. Well, it's been 6 months. There's been simply no progress at all. And the reason seems to be Vladimir Putin doesn't seem to want peace. He just seems to be stalling. Well, the Iranians have been stalling on the Iranian, on their Iranian enrichment program for 20 years. I think Israel, I don't say impatient with the United States, but maybe think the United States is being too gullible here. I think they thought they had to move before Iran gets a bomb. And the reason, they don't have bombers. They have jet fighters. Mm-hmm. They buy them from the United States, but they can't carry these huge bunker-busting bombs that the United States Air Force has, that the Navy has, because it takes a bomber to deliver them. So they're going to have to do, hundreds of these flights that you have to bomb the same. If they identify a place where they think uranium is being enriched and Iran is developing a bomb or building ballistic missiles below ground, they have to hit those sites again and again. So of necessity, because the United States is not participating in the attacks, it's going to require a sustained effort and hundreds of sorties.
Yeah. Well, they've called up the reserves, Tom, in Israel, and they've several airlines, I guess, are canceling flights into Tel Aviv from the United States right now. So it looks like we're in for really a new phase. I guess that's what was struck me about it. Like this is not just a sort of a tit for tat sort of strike back or trying to send a message. They really, seems to me like they're going for it now. They want to keep Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, and they're willing to take out whatever personnel and whatever military positions they have to do to make that happen.
That's exactly right. And I'm going to talk to Peter Berkowitz a little bit later in the show, and he's a contributor to RealClearPolitics and an expert on Israeli politics. And he's actually headed to the region next week. He's going to be flying into what probably will still be a war zone at that point. So I'm going to talk to him about some of these things. Look, it is a huge change of the status quo in the region, and we don't know how this is going to play out and what the U.S. role is going to be. There's a big debate before this happened about the U.S. getting dragged into a war in the Middle East. There are serious forces within the Trump administration that do not want that to happen, but there are also plenty of folks in Washington, in Congress, and even some within the Trump administration who feel like that this is something that we should be doing, and we should be supporting Israel as they, again, defend themselves, but in a preemptory way. I mean, this was a preemptive strike, and Benjamin Netanyahu gave a 9.5-minute long address, which we ran at the top of RealClearPolitics, where he explained why they wanted to do this. They had intelligence suggesting that that Iran could be, within weeks and months on the verge of producing up to, 9 nuclear weapons. And that's simply just a risk that they were not willing to take. And you can understand why, but you're right, Andy. I mean, this is a game changer for the region. This was something that, again, had been talked about for a long, long time, but now is actually happening. And we'll see how it unfolds and how many lives are lost and how much blood and treasure is going to be spent on this.
Yeah. Well, Carl, this is all happening against this backdrop of this weekend that's coming up here in America, where we are celebrating the 250th anniversary of the founding of the U.S. Army with a military parade in Washington, D.C. Happens to coincide with President Trump's 79th birthday. And then we've got about 1,800 demonstrations planned, the No Kings demonstrations, they're called, that are happening around the country to protest Trump's policies. The organizers say they are rejecting authoritarianism, billionaire-first politics, and the militarization of our democracy. So, God, a lot of messages on both sides this weekend.
So
How do you sort it out?
It's aimed at J.B. Pritzker, I guess, in part. Listen, when Donald Trump was elected the first time, I had a speech I was giving to a university group on the Mall a couple of, I think the day before the inauguration, and it was a rival inauguration, the women with the pink hats, and it was a much bigger crowd than the inaugural crowd. And, they sort of signaled they weren't going to let this guy be president. And it was a mixed message that I've been, I've talked about it before. You're defending democracy, but here's a democratic election you lost, and you're protesting the election, essentially. And there's an element of that this time on the No Kings side. I'll let Tom talk about the military parade. So people, let's talk about that for a minute, because that drives people in Washington crazy, as you know. The streets here where I'm broadcasting from are all blocked off, and the traffic's been snarled. People fleeing the country by the thousands. Every car has like 9 Democrats in it. It's like boat people in cars. And, they think this is it's like they compare it to North Korea or the Russia May Day parade but actually Trump got the idea in France. He was sitting next to Macron. He saw this. The French had this, down the Arc de Triomphe there, this amazing parade. And Trump, I don't blame Trump. He's thinking the French, they had 70 divisions and barely fired a shot in anger against Hitler. Wait a minute, why are they having a military parade? By God, we should have the military parade. So, like most things, if you go far enough, you peel the onion back enough, it's France's fault. But then this No Kings thing is, what are they protesting? And I'm going to fool around with this idea.
Well, I think we know.
He's not a king. He's a duly elected United States president.
Well, Fair enough, but they think that he is the Führer, and just like Hitler was duly elected, that he's gone too far, and this is they're protesting all things Trump. Tom, that's the way it looks to me.
I don't even know what to say about this. I mean, obviously they have the right to protest whatever they want peacefully. Let's hope that these protests are peaceful and we don't get a bunch of shenanigans happening in, multiple cities all around the country, because that's only going to encourage the police and law enforcement to go in there and crack some skulls. And of course, that'll reinforce the idea that, in Donald Trump's America, you can't have a good old fashioned protest like they used to in the 60s. So we'll see. I mean, but to your point, Andy, the message, no kings. I mean, I don't quite get it. I understand they want to show this fight against Donald Trump, and they feel like he represents all of these awful things. But if I were protesting, I would not have named it that. I would have come up with something, probably something different. So we'll see. But this is just part of the process. Democrats, from the moment Trump came down that escalator, they've been protesting Donald Trump and trying to bar him effectively from public life. They've tried to throw him in jail. They've impeached him. They've tried to ruin his businesses. They absolutely cannot stand the fact that
they shot him, Tom.
They shot at him. Yeah, exactly. I mean, they absolutely can't stand the fact that this guy is in, American. They used to love him when he was just a Democrat living in New York, doing sort of his Donald Trump things. But once he entered politics, and once he entered politics as a Republican, they've been trying to get rid of him ever since. And they've been totally unsuccessful. These protests are going to do the same thing. They'll make the Democrats feel strong and feel good about themselves, but they won't change the fundamental dynamics of the political state in this country, which is Democrats have lost the working class. And, getting together with your buddies and, making up signs and marching around the streets is not going to change that. They have to change their policies. They have to change their messaging on issues that matter to the American public. And so in that sense, it's going to be just a rerun of the same thing.
Yeah. Well, two cheers for the No Kings movement. I'll tell you two things I like about No Kings. One is, if you go to their website and look at it, it's very clear how they are calling for a peaceful protest. And they make a big deal of that, which I think is appropriate. The other thing is they are not holding a demonstration in Washington, D.C. They're very clear on that. They didn't want it to be a counter to this celebration in D.C., which, by the way, we should remember is really supposed to be a celebration of the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army, which I think is worthy of celebration.
You don't think Trump backdated his birth certificate so it fell on this date?
It's entirely possible. But I think that the fact that they're not holding a counter demonstration in Washington, D.C. shows some foresight on their part. Anyway, we're going to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. We'll be right back after these words. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. And you guys, everyone has seen this footage of Senator Alex Padilla of California. It happened yesterday. He was forcibly removed from a news conference held by Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem in Los Angeles. The reaction from both sides have been swift. Here's just a little bit of the Democrats' reaction.
Just saw something that sickened my stomach. The manhandling of a United States senator. We need immediate answers to what the hell went on.
If you could make Alex Padilla forcibly kneel before this executive, when does it stop?
Let's have an independent investigation. Senator Padilla was trying to do his job.
So that was Chuck Schumer, Cory Booker, and Elizabeth Warren, Carl. So my first question really is not whether what happened was right or wrong, but whether the behavior of these three security personnel in the heat of the moment really tells us anything at all about Kristi Noem or Homeland Security or Donald Trump or anything at all.
Well, Andy, listen, he wanted to get arrested. He wanted to cause a scene. He's there to do that. He's there to be disruptive. But this overreaction, it plays into their hands perfectly. Those senators, I mean, I don't assume they're really shocked and upset. I assume they're really happy, but they're happy because in their view, the Trump administration has showed its true colors. How about instead of arresting the ground, arresting me, say, Senator, when I'm done talking, you can talk. You know what? I booked the room. It's my show, but you know what? It's an equal. Invite him up. I mean, I think of the way Ronald Reagan used to handle hecklers, and the Trump people have lost the plot a little bit. So I'm with the Democrats on this one, Andy.
I think you're missing the point of my question, which is that this is in the heat of the moment.
So,
but this is the heat of the moment. Kristi Noem's at the podium.
Yeah.
How can you blame her? How can you blame Donald Trump? How can you blame anybody? There are 3 Secret Service agents who are trained professionals, and this is how they reacted when this event happened. I'll turn to Tom, I guess.
They don't think a Hispanic man can be a senator? What are you saying, Andy?
I think that they didn't know he was a senator. He's a big guy. He comes into the room. It's disruptive. And they reacted. And again,
right, Tom, give Andy the answer he wants, because obviously I didn't.
No,
no, I understand what Andy's saying, but I think I side with Carl a little bit on this, in the sense that he did identify himself as he was getting pushed out of the room, right? And at that point, there was no need to force him to the ground, put his hands behind him, and put him in handcuffs. He was already out of the room. He was in the hallway. I have no problem with those agents putting their hands on him as he was, trying to disrupt the press conference, moving toward the stage and being like, hey, and pushing him out of the room and closing the door and saying, look, this is not the time or place for this. If you have questions for the Homeland Secretary, we can arrange a meeting, whatever. This idea, Elizabeth Warren, that he was doing his job, that this was congressional oversight, is just total bullshit, right? He was there to make a scene. He wanted to make a scene. He did make a scene. And so that's fine. And he should have been removed. It's what happened after that. And to your point, Andy, I think these guys went a little bit too far in the heat of the moment. Even if they're trained to do that, he did identify himself. He apparently wasn't wearing his congressional pin that all these folks wear that helps identify them as members of Congress. But they didn't have to force him to the ground and put him in handcuffs. And that's where, now Cory Booker gets to stand up there and talk about. I mean, I saw someone who likened this on X, a picture of him being pushed out the door, to like a picture of like Selma, Alabama in like 1965.
No, it's the Reichstag fire. It's
all right.
It's the end times for democracy.
But I think you guys might be missing my point. And my point is,
please make it in your own words,
okay.
Eddie. We are curious.
One more time.
We've tried twice to answer your question, but apparently we're not doing a good enough job.
But my point is, Tom, I take your point. Like maybe these Secret Service agents in that third phase of this very quickly unfolding event went too far. They should not have put him on the ground. They should have handcuffed him. However, that is what they did in that moment based on their training. Why does that tell us anything at all about the Trump administration or Kristi Noem or our immigration policy? It is completely discrete event, in my view.
Yeah, but did Kristi Noem apologize to Padilla? Did Trump call him, invite him to the White House? If the idea here,
I think she did have a conversation with him after, though.
Yeah. The idea is that the tone is coming from the top, and they're acting. The accusation is that this is symbolic. He was there for symbolism, and the symbolism is that you're squelching dissent. You're squelching. You're being heavy-handed. That's.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes from the top. You think that's an unfair implication?
Okay. I do. I think that we sort of draw too much on the symbolism of it and not enough on the facts on the ground. And I also think maybe I'm a little more sympathetic to the Secret Service in these situations, but imagine how tense it is when you're trying to protect someone like Kristi Noem in a situation like this. And
she might shoot your dog.
The lesson here, Carl, is don't ever crash one of Andy's press conferences. Got authoritarian impulses.
Tom,
he will put you down.
Tom, we're cracking wise, but I think Andy's kind of won me over. So
there you have it.
That's a good point. Good point,
I am
Sandy.
probably going to hear more about this in the future. But
Megyn Kelly's listening. You're in trouble.
Okay. Hey, Megyn Kelly may agree with me on this.
I don't think so.
But Tom, in other news from LA, just bring us up to date on these court cases, because my head is kind of spinning from whether or not Trump has got the authority to send in the National Guard or not, because one minute he did, one minute he didn't, and then he seems to have it again.
Apparently, yeah, there was the court case that basically said court decided that Donald Trump did not have, he had to transfer control of the California National Guard back to Governor Gavin Newsom. And of course, Gavin Newsom goes right out and says, I'm going to take control of the National Guard and Donald Trump is not going to have control. And then there was another court decision that basically said, hold on a second. No, Trump still has control. So I think that's where things currently stand. But you're right.
The appellate court, the higher court.
Correct. Yeah.
Delayed
Correct.
implementation of the district court's order. And if you read the opinion, the order, it sounds like, first of all, they want a full-blown hearing on it, or at least a longer hearing on it, but also the implication is that it would be disruptive. Suppose they give it back, they take it from, then they're going to give it back to them. So it's called the National Guard. I think I can kind of see where this is headed.
All right. Well, guys, it is that time, because it is Friday.
You can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious.
It is the You Cannot Be Serious segment, which has become my favorite part of the week. Tom, what have you got for us this week?
Well, by the way, that was actually, so people who know where that clip is from, that was John McEnroe at Wimbledon, not Roland Garros. And if you saw this match that was played earlier this week, it was a absolutely amazing final in Paris. So that's aside. My nominee for You Cannot Be Serious this week is Alexander S. Vindman. Remember him? The person who basically was portrayed by the media as this sober, nonpartisan member of the NSA who basically led to Trump's first impeachment by leaking the details of this phone call that he had with Zelensky. He tweeted just a few hours ago, after the incident that we just talked about with Senator Padilla, how about this for disrespect? F off, Secretary Kristi Noem. F you, you fascist bitch. That's what. And then he retweeted it again. This is not a serious individual. He is he's a member of Congress now. So Alexander Vindman, you cannot be serious, please.
Carl, what do you got?
Well, you mentioned McEnroe. I'm sticking to the tennis theme. Sally Jenkins had an amazing column. She's a world-class sports writer for the Washington Post, the daughter of the legendary Dan Jenkins. And she was fooling around with Chat GPT. And she asked it a question about tennis just to see. It couldn't answer her question, so it started making things up. Her sub headline in the Post is, I wrote a column about a tennis phenom. When asked about it, Chat GPT committed one unforced error after another. When Sally confronted Chat GPT with its errors, it just started lying. So those of you who say that AI is not a threat, you cannot be serious.
Well, mine is Sabrina Carpenter, who is a pop star. You guys may know of her. She's got a new album coming out, and it precedes the release of this fall of the new Spinal Tap movie, which is called Spinal Tap 2, The End Continues. So if you guys remember, in the original Spinal Tap movie, which was released back in 1984, the band gets into trouble because the cover art of their new album, which is called Smell the Glove, features a woman on the cover, and the record company deems it too offensive to be released. Well, Sabrina Carpenter's new album drops on August 29th, and it's called Man's Best Friend. This is how USA Today describes the album cover. The photo shows Carpenter in a black dress and high heels, kneeling on the ground in a dog-like pose, while an unidentified individual stands off to the side and pulls her by the hair. So I don't know if this is a tribute to Spinal Tap or it's a tie into the new film, but if you ever haven't seen Spinal Tap, go back and watch it again. The new movie comes out this fall, and Sabrina Carpenter's new record comes out in August. I all I can say is, Sabrina Carpenter, this is either a great tie-in or you've got to be kidding. Anyway, that is the segment for this part of the program. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. Don't go away. We'll be back with more Real Clear Politics right after these words.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Philip Wegman, White House reporter for RCP, and I'm now joined by Connecticut Representative Jim Hines, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, what do we know with certainty about the Israeli attacks on Iran at the end of the second day of this new conflict?
Yeah. Well, I guess we know two things. Number one, the initial Israeli strikes were superbly precise and accompanied by a massive failure of intelligence on the part of the Iranians. I mean, it's not like the clearance of non-essential U.S. personnel out of the Gulf countries wasn't visible to them. And yet they lost, at least a half dozen of their senior-most members of the military. Not to mention the failures associated with apparently drones being pre-positioned in Iran, sort of, harking back to what the Ukrainians were able to do in Russia. So, stunningly precise, difficult, probably years of planning on the parts of Israelis in terms of the strike. And of course, just now we're starting to see the Iranian response, which it's hard to imagine that it won't be muted because there are so many missing now senior Iranian leaders. And there's been a fair amount of destruction of their ability to respond. But, they've still got their proxies. They've still got a fairly fearsome arsenal. They've still got the Houthis in Yemen. They have terrorist cells around the world. So, it's always a fool's errand to be optimistic about the outcome of conflict in the Middle East. But, hopefully the Israelis succeeded in degrading the Iranians' ability to cause as much havoc as they might otherwise cause.
Mm. And obviously, Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu has said that this campaign will be ongoing. But is there anything you can tell us about whether or not Israel was able to begin to achieve their primary war aim here, degrading Iran's ability to enrich uranium? Have they been set back days, months, years? What do we know right now? Obviously, it's early.
Yeah, and a little bit speculative because, I don't think we have formal intelligence assessments or damage assessments or what have you. But based on all that I'm seeing, it's clear that the Israelis made pretty short work of the remainder of Iran's anti-aircraft capabilities and that they hit the Natanz facility fairly hard. They probably destroyed lots of centrifuges at Natanz. Fordo, of course, is the facility that has the rooms and capabilities deep underground, and it doesn't appear that the Israelis have, moved the kinds of ordnance onto Fordo that would have been effective. It's not clear they have the kinds of ordnance that would be necessary to reach deeply buried facilities. But you observed that the Prime Minister said that this would be weeks. Yes, it will be weeks because the nuclear infrastructure is, fairly scattered around Iran, and it's not just facilities, it's people, as a number of Iranian nuclear scientists were also taken out in the initial strike. So, yeah, and then, of course, you will have the Iranian response. They will have some response, and then you'll have the Israeli response to that. So I think we are far from the moment where we can say with any certainty that there won't be major escalation here. I think there probably will be.
Mm. Both the White House and Jerusalem have said that the United States was not involved at all in this attack. Do you have any reason to doubt that? Was there intelligence shared? Do you think that the United States had more than a heads up, or do you think that that account is probably the most accurate one?
Yeah. I do think it is true that the United States Department of Defense was probably alerted at some point yesterday morning. Let's call it 8 to 12 hours before the strikes. I don't have any reason to believe that the president and the Secretary of State are being dishonest, that the United States was in no way involved. There is a certain baseline intelligence sharing relationship between the United States and Israel that tends to focus more, as you might imagine, on threats other than Iran. But I can't say for sure, what sort of conversations may have occurred in the sort of tactical intelligence sharing thing. But no, I think there's a reason why the Secretary of State and the President were adamant to point out that the United States was not involved, because obviously attacks on United States troops or facilities in the region would be a massive escalation, very much probably, to the detriment of the Iranians. But, anytime that, men and women of the American armed forces are involved, that creates a whole other level of nervousness and agita for members of Congress and members of the administration.
And President Trump was urging Iran to make a deal just hours before the strike. And then even after the attack today, we saw in some of the statements that he posted to Truth Social that he was in touch with Iranian leaders, and he was still urging them to make a deal. How optimistic should the United States be that there's a diplomatic solution here? What do you make of this offer of a second chance, or is it too late at this point?
Yeah, in my opinion, the talk of, okay, next week the Iranians are going to sit down and negotiate, I think that's absurd. Now, there are PhD Persian studies people who are better equipped to analyze the Iranian character than I am. But, there was a diplomatic solution here. It was called the JCPOA. And I can tell you this as somebody who had access to the intelligence, it was actually very successful at creating a lot of time and distance between the Iranians and a bomb. This president, Donald Trump, decided to tear that agreement up, largely, I suspect, out of his own instinct, but at the urging of Prime Minister Netanyahu. And I have every reason to believe that the Trump administration was making a good faith effort to negotiate another deal. They would have had to have had that deal be stronger than the JCPOA, because they obviously couldn't agree to a deal that was weaker. And I do suspect that probably ran into bumps and Iranian red lines. And I suspect that the Iranians were doing what the Iranians always do, which is, negotiating in the bazaar and being dilatory and all that good stuff. But it sticks in my craw a little bit, quite frankly, given the risks that a war in the Middle East poses to the world, to energy prices, to inflation, to men and women in uniform. It does stick in my craw a little bit that the Israeli prime minister decided to do this without really exhausting the process of a diplomatic agreement. And look, my own view is, having spent some time recently with the Israeli prime minister, that this was a decision that was made months ago. I think the prime minister was looking for the moment to do it. And, as you will have seen, the attack occurred on the 61st day after President Trump's 60-day sort of bracketing of this process. So here we are, and all we are left to do is hope that this conflict de-escalates rather than escalates.
Do you think that Netanyahu bigfooted Trump, or do you think that these overtures to Iran were kind of naive? Certainly some from the Obama administration, like Ben Rhodes, have suggested that this might have been, part of a larger ruse on the Trump administration's part.
I think if you look at my social media, you will see that I never really believed that these negotiations with the Iranians were destined to succeed. I think the debate inside the White House is probably very complicated, because on the one hand, you have a hawkish, almost neocon instinct. On the other hand, you've got the MAGA instinct of do not get involved with foreign wars. So I think that the debate inside the White House was probably complicated. But I also have very little doubt that the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, has been determined for a good third of my lifetime to attack Iran. We know that he wanted to under President Obama. We know that he wanted to under President Biden. Both presidents stopped that. Based on the conversations I had with him several months ago, I walked out of my conversations with him with no doubt in my mind that what we saw happen yesterday was going to happen.
Yeah, well, this is a speculative question, but why don't you think Trump was able to succeed where those former presidents had been?
Well, there's probably an analogy to be drawn with the trade deals, right? We were promised, 90 trade deals in 90 days. Negotiating a trade deal is very, very hard. It typically takes months, if not years. Negotiating a nuclear deal is even harder. It took years and experts and all kinds of allied effort, the British, the Russians, to get to the JCPOA, and it took years to get there. Because this is really challenging stuff. And, you've got Steve Witkoff running around doing stuff, apparently without much assistance from the NATO allies or obviously Russia. And so the idea that in a 60-day period, the president was going to negotiate a stronger deal than the JCPOA that violated any number of negotiating red lines that the Iranians had put out there, I think is fairly absurd. I continue to believe that this attempt at negotiation was partly because of the president's expectations, but partly because of the Israeli prime minister's commitment to going to war, was never going to succeed.
Yeah, and this attack did come at a moment when it seems that Iran's on the back foot. I mean, Hezbollah condemned the attacks, but they haven't promised to retaliate. The Houthis haven't said anything. The old Syrian regime is gone. My question for you is, does that alienation make Iran more vulnerable, more dangerous, or is it both? I mean, have the Israelis backed Iran into a corner where they have nothing left to lose, and they, go for maximum destructive effect here?
Yeah, and look, I have to acknowledge that that you have to look at the Israeli strikes on Hezbollah, the Israeli strikes on Hamas, and say that they dramatically outperformed the expectations of people who are bitterly pessimistic about the ability to get the bad guys in the Middle East, if you will. Our experience with the Iraq War is one that conditions all of us to think, you go in with the best of intentions and you end up, leaving with bitterness. But that has not been what the Israelis have been able to pull off. Remarkable weakening of Iran. And I guess my analysis would be that I don't think there's any chance that there is likely to be a negotiation in a week. The Iranian regime can't sustain the visual of being bombed into negotiating. On the other hand, their ability to, I hope I'm right in saying this, but I think that their ability to attack, certainly through their proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, has been seriously reduced, but not eliminated. Not eliminated, as we learned from the Houthis, who we were unable to dispatch, despite the full strength of a carrier strike group and an awful lot of other U.S. military assets. It is still a very, very dangerous array of tools that the Iranians have. Look, if nothing else, shutting down the Straits of Hormuz, that's a 20-mile wide gap that, something like 20% of the world's oil goes through. And it is not hard for the Iranians to shut that down. That means that gas prices are now going up at the pump. And, that means that there's a higher probability that the United States gets involved. So, it's been a pretty remarkable 24 hours. But again, long experience tells me that the Middle East will surprise you, and not in a happy way.
Just two final questions here. You've been generous with your time. Netanyahu seemed to try and delineate the Iranian regime from the Iranian people in the public address that he made last night. And he said, "Our fight is not with you. Our fight is with the brutal dictatorship." I mean, do you have any indication whether these strikes are uniting the Iranian people behind the regime, or are these strikes giving, Iranian dissidents a opening for regime change? Again, it's very early, but what is your sense?
Yeah, so I think that there's very little question that Netanyahu's goal here is regime change, and not forced regime change, but regime change brought about by the Iranian people, which is why, of course, he said what he did with respect to the antagonist being the regime, not the people. It's also,
is it wishful
by the way,
thinking?
Well, good question. But look, in addition to what he said, the attacks so far have stayed away from economic targets. The Israelis could have gone after an awful lot of oil infrastructure, which they have not done. They have limited their strikes to the nuclear infrastructure, to nuclear scientists, to military commanders. They don't appear to have taken a shot at the national leadership, right? I mean, given everybody else they've been able to very precisely eliminate, they presumably could have gotten the supreme leader, but they did not do that. So everything that you see there would suggest that they are, in fact, trying to leave the door open to a popular revolt on the part of the Iranian people. Of course, the challenge on the other side of that is that the Iranian opposition is hopelessly divided. Many of its leaders are outside of the country, and whatever else happens, the Iranian regime maintains a a fierce mechanism of repression. So again, we can all cross our fingers for the best case scenario that the Iranian people finally say this regime has brought terrible ruin on us. And by the way, they're incompetent. And that they're going to rise up and make for a new Iran. But again, I keep falling back on this notion. I've been watching this stuff for a little while, and the Middle East there's an old saying amongst Middle East hands, which is that the Middle East is where dreams go to die. So I'm hoping that my pessimism, my long-earned pessimism, is incorrect. But again, the story has very much yet to be told.
Final question here, Congressman. You mentioned the different strains of thought within this current administration on foreign policy. You have sort of the MAGA isolationists, a label that they likely wouldn't accept, but is usable here. And then those who are more of the neoconservative strain. As they evaluate the options in front of them, do you think that there is an ideal footing where the United States is able to at once, stand with Israel, but avoid getting drawn into a larger conflict? Is that possible?
Yeah, the answer to that question is 100% fact dependent, right? On the one hand, and by the way, I think the factions are probably best illustrated by Marco Rubio, who's an old school, let's not say neocon, but old school internationalist. And then J.D. Vance, who, is happy to write off Europe and write off Ukraine and basically say we shouldn't be chasing monsters abroad. But I think the answer is 100% fact dependent. Look, if American troops die, if there's an Iranian attack on Al Udeid or air base or whatever, the president's hands in that circumstance will almost certainly be forced to jump in kinetically. But I do think that this president has a natural internal aversion to war and to kinetic conflict, and hopefully very much so in the Middle East. So again, I think if the Straits of Hormuz are not closed by Iran, if there's no attacks on American troops or assets, the probability of the United States getting involved in a very substantial way is low. However, if this turns around on Israel, it's also hard to imagine that the United States won't do what it did in both, I guess it was May and October, and put its assets in the service of defending the state of Israel. In other words, from missiles, from air attacks, that kind of thing.
Very good. Congressman, thank you for joining us. I'm Philip Wigman. You've been listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. Stay with us. We'll have more right after the break.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined now by Peter Berkowitz. He is the Tad and Diane Taub Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution and a regular contributor to RCP. Peter, good to have you back on the show.
Good to be with you, Tom. Thanks.
Now, normally we have you on the show to talk about the pieces that you write for us, but it just so happens that we need to talk about Israel. You are an expert on Israel, and obviously big news out of the Middle East. As I read about these attacks, Peter, this preemptive strike by Israel on Iran, it seems like, it was much more extensive than people originally thought it was going to be, and that it took anywhere months and years worth of extensive, detailed planning to carry out these strikes. What can you tell us about what went down last night?
Well, first of all, you're exactly right. This is, for Israel, an unprecedented attack on Iran, and has displayed planning that's taken place over years. Remember, Israel first identified Iran as its primary strategic threat in the late 1990s, already in the late 1990s. Not Iraq, not something else, Iran. And Israelis have been talking about the possibility of a strike on Iran's nuclear facilities since the late 2000s, 2007, 2008, again in the early 2010, 2011, 2012. So yes, Israel has been thinking about it, and not just thinking about it, laying the foundations for it. How extensive is it? We know that from about 3 a.m. Israel time, that is 8 p.m. our time, last night, Israel launched about 200 fighter aircraft and refuelers. 330 munitions or so have been dropped on 100 targets throughout Iran. And I'll add this quickly. Those who study these matters contemplated that Israel had two options for a strike on Iran. One, it could go for the nuclear facilities, or two, it could go for the military, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps installations and so on. Israel surprised everybody by going for both, and not only going for both, but also attacking their some surface-to-surface missile sites. As I said, an unprecedented attack on Iran by Israel.
It seems, and we're recording this on Friday afternoon, there hasn't been any retaliation that I'm aware of right now by Iran, and I want to get to that in a moment, but there was a report that just came out that apparently Israel managed to kill the leader of the Quds force, and wiped out basically all of the senior leadership, including the senior nuclear scientist and the senior Air Force officials. So it was almost like a decapitation strike in terms of the amount of military personnel they were able to take out.
It could remind you of the fall of 2024 when they took out the senior leadership of Hezbollah. They killed Hassan Nasrallah in his bunker, 5 or 6 stories underground, and with him took out 9 or 10 other members of the top brass for Hezbollah. Yes, an astonishing achievement in a short amount of time. We must immediately add that Israel's preparing for long days ahead. They did through an amazing Mossad operation. They had located drones on Iranian territory, and so they took out some of their the missiles that are aimed at Israel. But Israel is preparing still for the possibility of dozens, if not hundreds, of missiles launched by Iran at the Israel homeland.
And we're speaking with Peter Berkowitz, senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. Peter, you were in the State Department of the first Trump administration. And so what do you make of the reports that Donald Trump apparently urged Netanyahu not to do this, wanted Steve Witkoff was apparently headed to Oman this weekend for a 6th round of talks on the Iranian nuclear program. What do you make of the reports that, Trump didn't want Netanyahu to do this? He went ahead and did it anyway. And obviously Trump came out with a statement saying, look, we gave Iran every chance, chance after chance after chance. They didn't take it. There's still an opportunity before it's too late. But what do you make of our reaction and the reporting on the American side of this?
My sense of it, largely based on the reporting available to everybody, is that yes, the Trump administration wanted a deal. And don't forget, Trump gave the Iranians 60 days to reach an agreement in good faith. Those 60 days lapsed a day or two ago. They lapsed just before the Israeli attack. Trump has announced publicly that he was fully briefed a week ago on the Israeli plans. So it seems to me that Israel's conduct is consistent with Trump efforts to negotiate a settlement. The Iranians failed to comply with his demand, 60 days. Israel attacked, and keep in mind, Israel presented substantial evidence to the United States and to the world that Iran was reaching the point of no return, in which it had the capabilities to produce in short order as many as 9 or 10 nuclear weapons.
Right. Pretty remarkable. And we actually posted, Netanyahu gave a speech on this last night, and we posted that at the top of RealClearPolitics this morning, along with some other great stories detailing what, the reporting behind this so far. So I guess the question is, and again, this is somewhat unfair because it's such a fluid environment, but what do you expect? How do you expect this to play out, Peter? What is Israel going to do? You mentioned they're obviously preparing for retaliatory strikes from Iran. But how do you see this playing out over the next, few days, weeks?
So Israel's getting ready for a campaign that could last weeks. But we have to identify already a few surprises. Iran's great deterrent for decades has been Hezbollah, which up until a year and a half ago, had 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed at Israel. So far, silence from Hezbollah, no attacks. So far, there has been an effort at reprisal, a small one. The Iranians launched about 100 drones. These are very slow moving. They take about 10 hours to fly from Iran to Israel. I believe all of them have been intercepted and shot down by the Israelis. But Israel is still getting ready for the possibility of salvo of hundreds of cruise and ballistic missiles. We don't know, from the reporting, we don't yet know well to the extent to which Israel has damaged their surface-to-surface missile capabilities. But Israel is preparing for that eventuality. I add one more observation. An Israeli news commentator connected an anchor who asked about the next wave of attacks. This was just a couple of hours ago. And the military analyst said, you shouldn't speak of waves as if there are separate episodes. Since 3 a.m. Israel time, Friday morning, he said it's been a succession of aircraft headed for Iran, dropping their munitions, coming back to Israel, next one setting out. So we are, as you say, in a very fluid situation. Thus far, I think it's fair to say that Israel's achievements are nothing short of stunning, but it's war, an unprecedented war. We have to continue to watch the Israelis and the Iranians very carefully.
And you, I believe, are headed to the region next week. Just give our listeners a sense of what that is like, or what that will be like heading into essentially what will be a war zone.
Well, yes, I will tell you this. I had the foresight 2 months ago when I booked the ticket to book on El Airlines, because other airlines have no doubt already canceled their flights in and out of Israel for an indefinite period. The Ben Gurion Airport has been closed since the Israeli attack began this morning in Israel, but they hope to get it open soon, and I fully expect to arrive on a El Al flight next Thursday afternoon in a rather quiet airport.
Okay, well, safe travels to you. Peter Berkowitz, the Tad and Diane Taub Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution and a contributor to Real Clear Politics. Peter, always good to speak with you. Again, safe travels, and we hope to get a report from you when you return from Israel.
Wonderful, thank you.
All right, we are going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics. I'm Andrew Walworth, and our next guest is James Varney. He is a reporter at Real Clear Investigations. Jim, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Andrew.
So, Jim, you had a piece this week in Real Clear Investigations. It also ran on the front page of RCP, and it is this fascinating look at what actually happens over a couple days at a U.S. immigration court in New Orleans. So let's start there. Why New Orleans, and what made you want to write this story?
Well, I'm based in New Orleans, so that made the most sense. We had also done something similar in 2022. So we thought it made sense to go back and see what's different, what's going on now that the Trump administration has changed, and so much of the U.S. immigration policies have changed with that. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we also wanted to show readers is the courts is how most of this is going to get decided, right? And we mentioned this. You see all these headlines about the deportations and the arrests, and is he going after criminals, or is he just rounding up anybody at traffic stops or whatever? And that's happening, but that's a very small percentage overall of how many immigrants have come into the U.S. illegally in the last 4 years. Most of those cases ultimately are going to be decided in immigration court. So we thought, let's go take a look and just tell people this is what's happening there.
Yeah. So just give us sort of that sort of view. What's the court like? How busy is it? How many people are being processed? And this is just one of, I don't know how many dozen or hundreds of courts across the country, right?
Right. It's a big network. It goes from Massachusetts, and they have one in Saipan and Puerto Rico, and all throughout the 48 states. So, and I think there's something like 700 immigration judges who are appointed by the Attorney General. It's an administrative position. So any of the listeners or viewers who have been into a courtroom, the criminal courts, or here in New Orleans, you have different civil and criminal, but anybody who's been in a criminal courtroom, it isn't like that at all in New Orleans. It doesn't have the sort of august trappings that you associate with a big courthouse. There's no pillars in front. It's actually a big office building down by the Mississippi River. And it's very corporate in the sense that it's just a hallway. There's no windows in the rooms. You're not allowed to take pictures or anything. And there's a very small waiting room with a few plastic chairs bolted to the floor. But most people in the mornings, it opens around 8:30 a.m. is when they start their proceedings. Most people are in the courtroom, which again is just a room, much less than what people associate with the idea of a courtroom, waiting for their hearing.
Wow. It sounds like the DMV or something.
Yeah, it's a little bit like that. It really is.
Right. And so how prepared are these immigrants who come in? I mean, do they understand the system? What's your impression of their level of preparation for what they're about to go through?
Well, I think that their knowledge of what might happen or what's going to happen is pretty good. We mentioned this in the story. One of the things that several attorneys and people that work in the court told me was never underestimate the community. So obviously there's been a lot of people going through this system in the last several years or more, and they talk amongst one another. And so I think that the question about preparation, I didn't see that there'd been a whole lot of preparation, because most of the people that are coming for their first in the morning, it's what they call the master calendar. And these are people that have gotten an NTA, a notice to appear. And most of those people know they're going to come in and the judge is going to ask them if they want a lawyer. Now, they don't have a Sixth Amendment right to representation like you would in a U.S. courtroom criminal case. But the court has a list of lawyers that do this kind of work, either pretty affordably or pro bono. Invariably, they say that they do want an attorney, and then they get another hearing several months down the road. And when we were there last month, it was in December. So they seem to know what they're going to face when they first walk in there.
Yeah. So it almost, because I read that was in your article, I thought it was interesting. It's sort of, they know, they go in, they ask for a lawyer, they're going to get a 6 or 7 month delay. And how long does the process take? If someone's going to go through the entire process, what's the average length it takes to process a case like this?
I'm not sure I have an answer for that, Andrew, but it's long. So you've got that notice to appear. You can request representation. Then you go to that hearing several months later. Almost invariably, the judges are deeming these people removable. So then you're going to have a removal hearing. That could be a year or more down the road. Then you can have an asylum request. So they estimate that there's about 3.2 or 3.5 million backlog cases in immigration court, right? And more than 2 million of those are asylum hearings. So if you were to go from notice to appear at the master calendar all the way to your asylum hearing, that is going to take, I would guess, a minimum of 2 years and could take 5 or 6 years.
Wow, 5 or 6 years.
In one case, we had they set another hearing, I think it was in 2029.
Wow.
So there can be a long one. And one of the huge wrinkles, though, that's different now than it was in 2022 is the detention that has been going on. Trump has been arresting people. And so one of the hearings we went to in the morning was done by video. And the people there, called alien respondents, is the legal term for the immigrants appearing before the court. All of these alien respondents were in detention in a facility here in Jena, Louisiana, which a lot of viewers and listeners probably heard about because the Columbia activist was there, and they've taken some high-profile people there.
Oh, right. Lots of protests around it.
Exactly.
That sort of thing, right?
That was not a thing in 2022. I mean, everybody was in person. Now you've got, as I said, an entire hearing dealing with 36 or more people that were in detention.
Yeah. Another thing you pointed out, which I thought was interesting, was how many languages were involved. I think you said there were like 6 different languages being spoken during these hearings, which would make total sense. But again, that just adds a layer of complexity to this whole process, doesn't it?
It does, and time as well. So we point this out, the little waiting room that I mentioned, they've got paperwork in folders on the wall I think they have them on, we say in the story, but I think it's 7 languages that they have this paperwork printed out, including Creole, because we were in New Orleans, and Wolof, which is an African language. There's always a Spanish translator.
Right.
They're there just part of the court because most of the people are Spanish speakers. But you did see this time much more sort of Middle Eastern and Asian immigrants from India and other places. And so there was a host of languages, Arabic and like versions. I don't know if that's even right, if they're versions of Arabic, but African and Asian tongues. And what they do there is they've got a service on the East Coast. The judge will call them and say, "Can I get a Arabic speaker translator?" And then they'll wait, and then they come on the speakerphone. And so you're right, they've got to keep doing that. And as one judge told me, it's expensive.
Yeah. I'm talking to Jim Varney. He's a reporter at Real Clear Investigations. He's written this fascinating piece of a couple days he spent in New Orleans at the immigration courthouse down there. And Jim, one of the things you talk about is the children, right? I mean, they bring their children to court. Is that sort of, is that part of the, is that required, or is that part of what they do to get sympathy, or what is it?
That's a good question. They're definitely not required. And going back to the idea of never underestimate the community, it seemed as if people knew pretty well that the kids are adorable, of course, and they're very well behaved, and they're dressed like they're going to church. But every time the judge would always say that you don't have to bring your children. The court would far prefer that they were in school. So they know that they don't have to bring them, and that they're, in some cases, really probably shouldn't be there. We listened to one asylum hearing where the woman was alleging that her father had vilely mistreated her and assaulted her in El Salvador. And the kids had to leave, when that part was going on, because obviously the mother didn't want to talk about that in front of them. So yeah, the kids are there, but it did to seem like a problem.
Yeah. So last question, because we got to wrap this up, but people do show up for these hearings, don't they? That's the other thing.
Yes.
The impression I think a lot of people have, and I certainly did, was sort of people cross the border, maybe they get processed or something, or they get an appointment, and then they sort of melt into the country and they're sort of lost somehow. But it sounds, from what you're saying, that these people at least show up as they're required to do, and are, that they're, I guess there is sort of a process. It may take a long time, but there's a process in place, and people are largely going by the rules.
Yeah, I think that's right. Certainly immigration attorneys told me that that's the case. And as you say, in the days that we were there, the overwhelming majority of the people listed on the master calendar showed up, not counting the one in Jenna, where of course all those guys were there.
Right. Yeah.
And it should be stressed that all the people that I observed in New Orleans, these are not the kind of bad guys that you're reading about that ICE is going out and arresting, right? And these are people that want to be in the United States, they're not out there indulging in criminal behavior every day. At least they certainly don't look like it.
Right.
Their stories were credible, and in many ways heartbreaking, even though, and this is not a Trump law, U.S. law only gives asylum for race, sex, religion, membership in specific groups, or credible fear of torture. Just wanting a better life it's a beautiful thing, but it isn't grounds for asylum. So you're right. The majority of them are going through it. And one of the things we're wondering about is how that might change as Trump's more aggressive policies filter down in the community.
Yeah, great. Well, hey, Jim, fascinating stuff. Appreciate you being here. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I've been talking to James Varney. He's a reporter at Real Clear Investigations, and you can find his article there, as well as a bunch of other original reporting. It's really worth checking out. That's our program for today. Thank you for listening. We'll be back on Monday. Have a great weekend.